This program is recorded and presented by Chippewa Valley Community Television. The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.
You are watching the Neighborhood Revitalization Summit, recorded May 12, 2016.
All right, it's a few minutes after, so we'll get started this evening. I'd like to welcome everybody back to the final meeting of the Neighborhood Revitalization Task Force. And again, thank you for coming out and providing your input into this planning process. Tonight, the only thing we're going to be doing is reviewing the draft of the report that has been completed. If you don't have a copy of the report, get your hand up and get a copy of it. I do not use PowerPoint. I love to have people look at the report and make sure they're concentrating on the report, because that's what we're going to be reviewing. And that's all we're going to be using this evening. Our agenda is fairly simple. I'm going to give a presentation on the report, and the purpose of the presentation is to make sure that everybody understands the statements in the report so that you can ask questions. If you believe those statements need to be clarified or added to, that comes as part of a second step in the process. So please hold those thoughts till later on. But let me get through the presentation, make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. We're then going to break into small groups, so we might move a couple of you people so that you're in a small group. Let you talk for a while, formulate your ideas, and then we'll have the small groups, or even individuals, if your small group doesn't agree with you, report out in terms of what do you think we missed? What do you think needs to be added to the report? What do you think needs to be corrected in this report? And Angie and Pat will be taking notes so that we can get those changes made. I would state that if you find typos or other minor corrections, please simply mark them in your report and hand it in. We don't want to spend tonight talking about typos and minor corrections, but we do want to see them because we know they are in the report. We've tried many times to get them out, and we never are successful. Okay, I'm on page 1 then of the report. It starts with an introduction that ties what we're doing to the comprehensive plan, which states we should initiate these meetings and seek to devise a comprehensive approach to neighborhood improvement. I'd like to add to this that the comp plan, which was adopted in 2015, actually was the Randall Park Neighborhood Association that started this in 2013, about a year and a half earlier. It was their work that got this whole process going. And it's a process that completes these tasks, not a report. A report simply documents where we are and what we might want to try in the future. And you'll find as we go through this list of tasks in the report, many of the things are already started because we've been doing this process now for about 3 years. The introduction goes on by documenting the planning process, how council appointed a 33-member committee, and we actually then place in Appendix A at the end of the report a list of the committee members. On page 2, we talk about the targeted neighborhoods. These are the neighborhoods around the downtown that have adopted neighborhood plans. There are 6 of them, and we provide a map showing their location. We then talk about the task force meetings. The first meeting, we spent time learning about the scope of the challenge with presentations from city staff saying, here's what we're doing now to address this issue. We then had 2 meetings where we brought in folks from outside the community that talked about what their cities are doing to address similar problems. We, at then our 4th meeting, discussed what we had learned and ranked a list of current actions and a list of possible future actions that might be considered. And then this final meeting is where we're reviewing the report. On page 3, we talk about our speakers. and we actually place in a bio at the end of the report, or their bios at the end of the report in Appendix B. In Appendix C and D are the list of current and possible future actions that were discussed by this committee at your last meeting. And then the results from the dot voting exercise that we did at your last meeting is placed in Appendix E and F in your report. And we should go to that just so you guys can see those results. They start on page 19 and go on to page 20 in the report. That's the results. First page is the ranking of current neighborhood actions. The group was asked, well, what does the city need to do better? And those are the votes then given to each of the actions that we talked about at that meeting. And I wouldn't consider this an actual voting exercise. It's more of a way of prioritizing or ranking what's important for this community to be working on. And you can see the top ranked point was to provide housing rehabilitation, home ownership assistance, and home energy savings. Second came code enforcement, which was actually probably talked about the most at the last meeting. And then ironically, third came hire a full-time code enforcement officer. So there was definitely a lot of emphasis on the need for better code enforcement within the community. If you go on to the next page, page 20, there we then actually ranked recommended future neighborhood actions, and that came from our discussions with the folks from other communities and what they do and which we could consider within our community. Top rank there was the implement the rental registration and inspection program. Second ranked was the appointment of a committee to create a nonprofit private neighborhood development corporation. And third then was the use of tax increment financing provisions to support neighborhood revitalization efforts. And again, you can see the ranking for the rest of those items in that list. I'm now going back to page 4, where we'll talk about the recommendations in the report. So we basically took most of the items that were ranked in that tally sheet and then provided a narrative in the report as a recommendation as we go through it. We didn't put all of them in there, but most of them, if they got some type of a ranking from the group at your last meeting. I do like the advice, and this is our consultant, Bill Weber, provided as an introduction in the bullet points at the top in terms of what it takes to do this type of work in these older neighborhoods. The current actions that need improvement, again, the top rank, and we start there in terms of explaining, was provide housing rehabilitation, home ownership assistance, and housing energy savings. And in the narrative then explains what those types of programs may be. It then notes that the Housing Authority in Western Dairyland provide money for rehabilitation or energy conservation loans and grants at this time, but it's far short of what the need is in this community. It states new ways to overcome hurdles in housing rehabilitation are needed, and several of those are described in this report, one of them being the Neighborhood Development Corporation is a mechanism in which you can enhance that. Going on to page 5, our second ranked point is the code enforcement, and it talks about some of the issues that we have in code enforcement, the handling of trash, property maintenance, nuisance behavior, lawn upkeep, sidewalk snow shoveling, and there's probably many, many others. But it does point out the city has approved the hiring of a full-time code enforcement officer, and that will happen in September of this year, which will get us back to where we were in terms of code enforcement about 6 years ago when we left a code enforcement officer position. Number 3 is inspect housing and
We're waiting till the end to ask questions?
I'm going to stop after I get through current and then ask questions, and then I'll stop again. Is that okay?
I can be patient.
Okay, thank you, Shane. So I'll take a break here. Next is inspecting housing and enforcing basic health and safety code. This is presently done by City County Health Department. They do a survey of exterior conditions of housing as part of their intensified housing enforcement program. They also do inspections of rooming houses through their current licensing. One of the recommendations in this report calls for inspecting rental housing, and this would improve the living conditions within these dwellings, similar to what is already occurring within the inspections of our rooming houses within our community. Again, the health department is having meetings at this time. There's a committee formed, and they're looking into how can they do that within the community. Next is reconstruction of alleys. It should be pointed out that the city will begin rebuilding alleys based on a coordinated system like we do our streets this year. Prior to this, it was done on if a petition was passed by a neighborhood. We did have a few years of using block grants money to do alley improvements, and now we're gonna actually get into doing alley improvements based on a similar system to our street improvements and then using special assessment financing. Next is snow plowing of our alleys. And again, the report talks about the city ought to study options for ways to accomplish this work, and that might actually include hiring of a private firm. Right now, private property owners are the ones that are out doing the snow removal in alleys. And I do like the picture Bill found down in the corner showing an alley snow covered within our community. On page 6, promote sidewalk snow shoveling. In the past, city crews used to go out and shovel sidewalks that weren't getting done. The city now does assign a contractor to do the job if we get complaints from the neighborhood. Again, with the addition of that full-time code enforcement officer, we should be able to be more proactive in that work, because that's what we were actually doing 6 years ago in terms of code enforcement. 7 is administer the historic preservation program more comprehensively. Several properties opted out of our historic districts back in the 1990s. The Landmarks Commission prepared recommendations regarding how to reinstate these properties, and we're still waiting for council to act on that report sometime in the near future. Another option that is available is a conservation subdivision provision, which we will talk about later as I make this presentation. Next is administer and improve our zoning code. The city did substantial changes in its zoning code back in the 80s and 90s and significantly reduced the density of development occurring in our older neighborhoods. The City Plan Commission is actually looking at updating parking standards within the zoning code, and that's something we likely see happening sometime this summer or fall. Again, another idea that we'll hear about later in this report is the idea of using a conservation subdivision as a way of looking at design of new development within these older neighborhoods. Coordination among major institutions. Coordination should continue among community development, police, inspections, university, health department, and others. Again, there's always room to improve those types of activities. And then finally, expand the use of neighborhood matching grant programs. It is a program that's out there. It gets limited use, and the city probably needs to promote that better. Let me also talk briefly about what we do well, and then we'll let questions come out. Looking at what this committee voted on, it appears the city does a good job in providing quality infrastructure such as streets, sidewalks, lighting, and public utilities. It appears the community does a good job as it pertains to our parks and trails, that we do a good job in our public schools within our older neighborhood. I think Lakeshore Elementary School is a great example of keeping that facility in the Randall Park neighborhood. It appears we do a nice job of supporting our neighborhood associations, particularly with all the neighborhood planning efforts that we've been doing. It appears we have strong business improvement districts within the community, and it appears we have been doing a good job in terms of continuing our efforts as it pertains to public health, particularly the efforts of the Eau Claire Healthy Communities and hospitals within the area as an example. So that is what we are currently doing and what we could improve or what we may be doing well. Are there any questions in terms of understanding what each of those statements are? Any questions? Shane?
The first question I had is under number 2, improved code enforcement.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood that the approval of a full-time code enforcement officer wouldn't necessarily impact enhanced code enforcement against trash handling and property maintenance, because those aren't really in the realm of code enforcement. Those are performed, or tasks performed by the health department. Unless there's some conversation to, move some of the trash.
I think, I would agree in terms of it is the City County Health Department's responsibility to do those tasks, but I do think this position at full-time can provide better coordination in terms of we can get the reports over to Health Department and get action going in a more responsive manner than our present half-time code enforcement position that's only in our office 2.5 days during the week. Okay?
Some coordination can happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think it'll help for better coordination.
The code allows PD, your group and the health department to all enforce that equally if so chose.
Yes.
The one other comment I was going to make just under number 3, inspect housing and enforce basic health and safety regulations. The sentence where it says rooming houses are currently inspected for compliance, that program ended as of February 28th with the passage of 176.
Really?
176 preempted that program because it stated that programs have to, or if there's a program in a city in the state of Wisconsin, it has to treat all rentals equally. Therefore, we can no longer single out rooming houses,
okay,
even though we had legitimate reasons to. So that program is gone, but the statements are still true about its success.
I was not aware of that, and that's a good thing for this committee to hear. Yes, Kathy?
But if we institute a rental registration program, then rooming houses can come back into the inspection process.
Correct.
So, and we're working on that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, any other question?
And I know we talked about this in the last meeting, if you don't mind refreshing my memory. The additional full-time code enforcement officer, that's going to be in addition to our half-time?
No.
It's going to replace that position?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? John?
So you're stating that they're no longer inspecting rooming houses?
Correct.
Because we just had some inspected not too long ago. When did they stop?
Mid-March, probably.
Okay.
A month ago.
So,
one other question. You you mentioned on the adapt the tax increment financing to help neighborhoods. Do you have any example of how that could be used in, like, say, the Randall Park neighborhood?
An example?
Or what you
I was going to get to that
Okay.
later.
All right.
So I'll try to include an example when I get to that later. Okay? Okay? All right, let me go on then.
Hey,
Now
Daryl?
I'm on
One
here.
more, Daryl.
Oh,
I didn't get my hand up. On number 7, page
Yes.
6, the Historic Preservation Program.
yes,
Would you just clarify, is that a program, is that an ordinance?
that is an ordinance.
So, are there any other ordinances that people have just been allowed to opt out of like that?
The ordinance was amended back in the 90s to allow people to opt out.
So you have to amend an ordinance?
Yes, the council amended the ordinance and said you could opt out.
Does this happen with other ordinances? I'm just curious.
Not that I'm aware of.
Interesting.
John,
So, what's the process to opt back in?
you can get reinstated. We have actually one coming through right now.
Part of that recommendation there is to try to, there is a more longer process to opt back in, but what we're recommending here is to try to streamline that process so people that do want to opt back in, we can do it fairly quickly for them. So that'd be one of the recommendations here. But we have, over the years, we have had a half a dozen or so properties that have opted back in.
Kelly?
Is there any incentive to opt back in?
It's just the program itself, in terms of the Landmarks program, has some low-interest loans available. There are some zoning ordinance benefits for some of the multiple family homes that might be grandfathered in, some design assistance, so there are some of those types of benefits that are available.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm now on the bottom. No, I'm not on the bottom. I'm on page 8. Recommended future actions. Number 1 is implement the rental registration and inspection program. This is where owners of rental housing would have to register a home and then have an initial inspection as it pertains to life and fire safety requirements. And then there can be follow-up inspections depending on how that first inspection went in future years. The evidence that they have gathered as it pertains to the rooming house licensing inspection, which this community's been doing for many years, is that it does improve the interior and health aspects of a home. And so the evidence is there. If you put these in programs in place, they will help your housing stock in your older neighborhoods. Number 2 is the appoint a committee to create a non-profit private neighborhood development corporation. And there's a lengthy then description of what a neighborhood development corporation can do, what its mission might be, whom might be involved in such a group. We heard from Madison, Milwaukee, La Crosse, all have these types of entities up and running, and there's a wide variety of things that they are doing. If you go on to the next page at the top of 9, it says the city should convene a committee to recommend the organizational mission, priorities, board membership, funding, staffing, and so forth. I would say that likely will happen this fall. I will do everything I can to get that happening this fall. And I can tell you that we've already had discussions with the university, Mayo Luther Hospital, Randall Park neighborhood, and some of the banks within the community, and they've expressed interest in being part of that committee to talk about, can we do that in this community? So that's what I can report as it pertains to that. Number 3, amend city tax increment finance regulations. City Council did approve on Tuesday a TIF policy. And in that statement, that policy, it does state it should include provisions for neighborhood revitalization. The city has already approved TIF number 10 that includes provisions to allow for investment in revitalization within a half mile of the boundary of the TIF district. That's a provision in state law that's allowed in TIF financing. And state law also allows the extension of a completed TIF for an additional 1 year, and that money can then be set aside for housing rehabilitation and other housing type things within older neighborhoods. So the council has said, in part of their TIF policy, we will be using our TIFs in the future to implement those ideas as provided in state law. What needs to be done next is setting up the programs in terms of what are we going to be spending that money on. Number 4, develop a targeted investment neighborhood group. This is an effort where you try to make your efforts in terms of neighborhood revitalization more noticeable by simply concentrating the work in a smaller area. A good example for Eau Claire would be Randall Park, in my opinion. But that's basically what that means in terms of the effort. And we had an example of another community that had done that in Madison. Number 5 is the use of arts and culture to revitalize our older neighborhoods. We had a nice discussion about this at our last meeting by one of our council members, and it is a very neat way to help in revitalizing our older neighborhoods is the whole arts and cultural thing. We see it in other communities within our country, and we are actually starting to see some of that occurring here now in Eau Claire with what's going on over at Danbury, the Phoenix Park, and the Future Performing Arts Center at the Confluence. Next is the adoption of a conservation zoning overlay district, and I think I've already mentioned this twice. This doesn't change the zoning within our older neighborhoods, it simply adds another layer of zoning in what's called an overlay district, where you could institute additional standards. The best one I can think of is design standards in our older neighborhoods. And that's why it might be used as another means of addressing some of the concerns in the historic districts that have been opted out of within our community. I'm now on to page 10. Implement a residential parking permit program in the vicinity of Mayo Hospital. And the city has already started that and is studying it as a pilot program in terms of can we have parking permits for the property owners and visitors as a way of limiting the amount of other parking that's occurring around Luther Hospital. Number 8, pursue an economic development grant from Invest in Wisconsin. If you remember Sally, one of our speakers, she has $2.6 million she wants to spend, and Eau Claire is one of 5 targeted communities in the state in which she needs to spend it in, and she'll be back this summer to meet with us. It must be used to finance business and not-for-profit projects within the community. Anybody has an idea of the type of a project, let us know or come to our meetings with Sally later this year because she's looking at spending money. 9 is consider using educational assistance program to leverage neighborhood revitalization. This comes out of La Crosse, where they actually teamed up with the university as a way in which they provided some programs to encourage reinvestment in older neighborhoods. So it would be an effort UW-Eau Claire would have to consider. 10 is marketing the neighborhoods. Again, if a neighborhood development corporation were in place, that might help in terms of marketing our older neighborhoods. 11 is coordinate the work of the neighborhood associations. They each have their own individual meetings, maybe working together once or twice a year as a citywide meeting is something that might help. Having a full-time code enforcement officer or one of the city planners facilitate those meetings is certainly something that we could do. 12 is institute alley trash collection. I do agree that the neighborhood appearance would improve substantially if the trash cans were back in the alleys, but that involves a code amendment. And then finally is reinstate sidewalk inspection program. That position was cut in the city, and it's a way of emphasizing the need for us to look at that again. Are there any questions and understanding of those points? Yes, sir.
Stand up. Just wanted to say something. I'm Stephen Ronstrom. I'm from the 3rd Ward Neighborhood Association, and we had a board meeting last night. And I think critical to this initiative is good communication. And our association wants to ensure, that our charter is affirmed and that the neighborhood plan is sustained. So our concern is density, that we keep the same density standards, that the relationship between renters and homeowners is sustained, same type of zoning that we have. We welcome to have the parking issues addressed, and we look forward to working with you all on this. Now, what happened was there was a video that went viral in our neighborhood, and it was kind of a interesting kind of, process here. And so there's a lot of concern expressed last night. Oh gosh, what is this neighborhood revitalization thing all about? Are they trying to open up for renters and going to change all kinds of things, and the development, we had concerns on that, the development authority, and what's all this about. And so I got a hold of the plan and then read it today, and I thought it was extremely excellent work. And I know that you've met for a year, and I'm just looking at it as an outsider, but my life can be affected by the work that's done tonight, and I really think that it's an excellent work. And my suggestion is that if we could take this plan back to the neighborhood associations and have a discussion, at least the board level, as kind of a feedback loop, that would probably help unify us, and it would probably help us, move some of these initiatives, forward in a better way. So congrats on the work well done. It's amazing how videos can get out, and a 30-second clip can be turned into all kinds of things. And we are concerned, I think, about our neighborhood, about our property values, our standard of living, and we want to be engaged and lead these kind of initiatives. And so thank you. I was volunteered to come down and say this, and I hope that you can know how important your work is, and that we can get a feedback loop before all this goes, much farther after the meeting tonight.
I can respond that it will be city staff's responsibility that if neighborhood associations or other groups want a presentation on this work, we'll certainly do that after Plan Commission and Council meetings. So, now, are there any questions on the other things that we could do? Yes, Kathy.
Well, I have a question about the targeted investment neighborhood program number 4.
Yes.
As I was thinking about that, is Randall Park too big to be a target, or should it be like Hudson Street from 1st to 5th? That's where Catherine lives. That's her reason I said that.
But if it's too big, we can make it smaller.
Yeah.
The answer to that is it can be whatever any group wants to set up. Normally, this type of targeted investment neighborhood program is set up by a neighborhood development corporation. So it really it's that type of an entity. The examples that came out of Madison were a good example where it started as a small neighborhood, that neighborhood development corporation, and it grew to multiple neighborhoods, and now they're actually considering taking that neighborhood development corporation and expanding it citywide. That's actually what happened in Madison in terms of its success. And that's probably, a good way of starting one here in Eau Claire is also start in a smaller defined area, and then if it's successful, you start expanding it out. The other approach is La Crosse. La Crosse just said we're going to create one of these entities and just start citywide and see what happens. So there's 2 ways of doing it, and it'll be a future neighborhood development corporation will have to discuss as part of its mission and goals which approach makes most sense in this community.
At number 2, I know you've talked a bit about that already, about the development corporation. That too is creating quite a bit of concern in the Third Ward neighborhood association. And the concern is there going to be an outside force with an agenda that is going to affect the integrity of our neighborhood? Mm-hmm. And so just the idea, there's going to be bankers and developers on this committee. Well, for some people that might not be a positive thing. That might be a negative thing, and someone wants to come in and make money at the expense of the standard of living and the ambiance in the community.
As for any group that gets created, it is the mission and the goal and the group that can show its success or failure. There's literally thousands of these types of associations throughout the United States. Most of them are very successful. Some of them are not. And that's just a fact in terms of this type of group. The best way to monitor that is put in place proper checks and balances as you create the group. So, yeah. Okay. Other questions? Everybody knows now what we're going to talk about. Okay. All right. Our next task then I think I got through everything. Good. Is to let you as small groups talk among yourself. We're going to be real informal. You can even get up and wander around to other tables. But just sit and think about, you know, what's in this report for the next however long you want. I'll stop after probably 20 minutes. And then we're going to go around each table and let each table report out. We'll take notes. If you, as an individual, have something you want to say, we'll also do that also. So go ahead and talk for a while in terms of what we got. Try to figure out, what did we miss? What do we need to correct? What do we need to add? If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll come around.
That's maybe, that's a more concise.
Which table wants to go first? Shane? Do you guys want to go first?
Well, one of the things I
Oh.
think.
Joe's going first.
You got your picture in the thing, so.
One of the things that could disturb us, we live on Grand Avenue, Randall Division. Anyways, is garbage collection. It seems every holiday, no matter Christmas, 4th of July, whatever it happens to be, we get, I'm a block and a half from Carson Park. Garbage cans are not pulled back. You're supposed to put it out after 5 o'clock on Tuesday night, and Wednesday, you're supposed to have it pulled in Wednesday night. Okay, well, this happens, sometimes it stays out there all week. That's one complaint. And then one of the other complaints, being that I live in a college district, I can understand it is a heck of a lot better than what it used to be. But we still have that problem of garbage collection. I mean, now, do they have, and the rotation sometimes in this house can be sometimes 2 and 3 times a year with the graduation from the college and so on and so forth. So, I mean, my thought was, why can't we get the owners of these houses to put it right into their rent for automatically garbage collection is 365 days a year, not just when they feel they get one. Sometimes they're moved in and they, oh, we have to have garbage collection? Okay, you know. But that's my main concern, and I think that's what we were talking about mainly here. And then the other thought is also bringing the containers back to the house would be nice.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale.
Anybody else have something on this table? Okay. This table. Who wants to report?
I'll
Okay.
give you a small
Tammy,
report.
go ahead.
Okay, you talk into what?
The little guy hanging down there. Way at the bottom.
Oh.
Just hold that up. There you go.
Okay, I'm just gonna pony off of the discussion on garbage collection. I think that the city itself should have a city ordinance where all trash is collected by property taxes. And my sister's in Sarasota, Florida. They distribute the routes amongst the providers, and they have a common pickup, so less work on the roads. And every citizen in the community has trash collection and recycling collection by the city and by the county.
Okay.
That's not the end.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and I guess as an incentivizing thing for people who renovate properties, one of the first things that we brought up at our table the first meeting was when you pick up a distressed property, you improve the property, and then the assessors come in the day after you say we're done, our permits are closed. They raised the taxable taxes on the property from $68,000 to $112,000 in one, good job, guys, now your taxes are doubled. So couldn't the city incentivize people who do good renovations and give them a sliding scale of 3 to 5 years before they get it up to the high tax value?
Okay. I I would question under state law if that could be done, but we'll ask city assessors that question. Because I think in the state of Wisconsin, it has to be based on full assessed value of the property. But it's a good question. The trash collection, that actually is in the city's sustainability plan, the idea of going to a single route type of a system where it does significantly reduce the amount of trash trucks driving around the community, it saves on your roads, all that type of stuff. So it's in a plan. Both of these are interesting ideas, and I'm glad you brought them up. Pat, note them. Okay, is there anything else at this table? Okay, next table. Who wants to speak? Kathy.
I'm in shock.
You're in shock?
We ended up talking a little bit more about process, and how we transition from this report to an actual plan, and how the various actions in the report will get done. We can see how some of them will get done, but we think that Daryl should figure out how to assign responsibility for the various action steps in the next step. And we also talked about measures of success, although Daryl points out it's a report, not a plan, but when it does become a plan, what would be our measures of success? For example, fewer rentals, the health department's map of properties that need help. I can't remember what you call it, but so many violations, the violations map, if that would improve that sort of thing. So that's something probably to be talked about in the next step.
Okay.
And couldn't we require garbage collection without it becoming a city function?
I think the operations of garbage is a city ordinance in terms of how it gets picked up and whatever. That can be a city council decision, whether it's private sector, public garbage collection, a fixed route system. All that can be decided by council, but I don't think there's any other way to do it other than the council saying, here's how we're going to do it within this community, in my mind. In terms of process, we can do a plan implementation chapter that's common with our planning documents, and it simply takes the steps that we identify in the document and assigns a department or an entity to do it, and maybe gives it a time frame, and it can give measurables. And I think doing that with the Plan Commission is probably the best body to do that, because they're very familiar with taking what the report says and putting it in an actual plan implementation chapter. So that's something we can do. Okay? Was there something else at this table? I saw you kind of reaching for the mic.
No.
No? No?
I was reaching to give it back to you.
Okay. Just want to make sure. All right, next table. Here.
I'd just like to start out by saying that in the city of Chicago, they pick up their garbage, they put plows on their garbage trucks. So you can have the garbage truck go down this alley, plow it at the same time as picking up trash. I think what we basically talked about was the fact that you need to really look at what's going on around downtown. We're trying to revitalize it. We've got millions of dollars being spent and built down here now. And so you don't want to really have neighborhoods that that you're driving through to get down there that look like they need to be urban developed and basically torn down and rebuilt. So we like the idea of having a plan that would assist people with making these neighborhoods what they once were, which were very livable and also very lovely neighborhoods to look at and drive through and be in.
Okay. Anything else this group wants to add? All right, this is the group that was really working hard, so we're expecting a lot from this table. Who wants to report?
And
then
Colleen?
We split the responsibility.
Okay.
We're collaborative. We're
Okay.
setting the example already.
Yes, we are. There. Page 9 is the one we addressed first. Number 6, the Conservation Zoning Overlay District, which we think is wonderful, but something that's missing is the very last sentence where you talk about helpful in areas where demolition. We're concerned in our neighborhood about demolition because it's happening. And so I think you ought to consider who's making the decisions for demolition, why, how they make them? Are there any guidelines? How do we preserve historic homes? You know, and the Development Corporation might help with this. It's not, like Jim said, there's no simple answer. But at this time, the owner just said, could indicate that it's dilapidated. But we never see the inside. We don't really know. And we don't know if there's historic value because of the position of the house or because of all kinds of things. So in terms of preservation, I think that there should be maybe some kind of a tougher process a developer has to go through with some checks and balances. Like you own the house, you want to tear it down and put something bigger. Maybe there's a little committee in between there that checks to see if there's any reason why it shouldn't be torn down, or if there's an alternative to it before it happens so quickly.
And that's what a landmark ordinance does.
But
even a landmarks ordinance after a year or year and a half, if an alternative use cannot be found, it must allow the demolition of the building. But it is that checks and balance.
But we're not talking about just the fine homes with the markers. Is that what
so
you're
you're just talking about any home?
We're talking about any home on Chippewa Street.
We can see if that's feasible. I would wonder if it's not landmark, if that's actually feasible under law. But we can see if that's something that a conservation district, overlay district is actually doing within other communities. It's something we can research.
Okay, and the follow-up is that where it's most likely to occur in our neighborhood, it's in the RM zone.
Sure.
Half of our neighborhood is RM zone. So either we relook at that for our neighborhood, or I don't know what the answer is. It's not simple, but it seems like it's very easy for a developer to come to our neighborhood and say, we're going to take down this house and build something bigger on these two lots. It's fairly simple.
Okay.
It should be harder.
Big issue in Minneapolis. I hear about that all the time.
Okay.
You know, they're just going in and putting in condos in the old neighborhoods and destroying the ambiance.
Well, then they're not affordable for people who were able to live in the previous
And then they're
property.
$1,600 a month.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, on page 6, number 9, a suggestion is under coordinate among the major institutions is to include CBTC into that conversation.
Okay.
And then the second suggestion for number 9, on the last sentence, to add something that specifically calls out public nuisance behavior. So it could read something like, give special attention to property upkeep, comma, efforts to curb binge drinking, comma, and negative behavioral issues often associated with increased alcohol consumption.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, and then there's a couple more. Page 9 again. We had a suggestion from our table about really intentionality of including just more inclusion of what does culture and arts mean in the community. So there is a suggestion of a sentence, something like, there should be intentional inclusion of all people in the community, including gender, age, ethnicity, etc. And then also under number 5, I think calling out the example from St. Paul, how they had the public works artists in residence really embedded within the kind of municipality and working directly with some of sidewalks or streets and things like that, as another example.
Okay, and that was the presentation by your predecessor, Pat. Lucy.
I have this all noted in our table document, so I'll be happy to share it. That's it from this table.
All right, so we covered everybody at this table. Last table. Mr. Rindo. It's up on the top there, a little, yeah.
So one of the things we discussed is it really comes out of number 1 on page 4. Provide housing and rehabilitation, home ownership assistance, and home energy savings. And one of the paragraphs says, in addition, purchasing rental housing for home ownership in the area near the university is difficult because of the sale price of these properties is based on their high rental income generation. This higher ceiling inflates their value, making it difficult for a family to purchase such properties. And you know, I don't know where it belongs in here, but one of the things that we've had some discussions with Helene about is ways that we can identify working the university, the neighborhood associations, the city, private developers on identifying appropriate places for development of mid to higher density housing near the university that will provide more safe, quality, affordable housing for university students that will then take the pressure off of some of these properties that go for a much higher value than they would typically if the market were just driving that. And so how might we as a community work to identify areas where that mid to high density housing would be appropriate and could be constructed, and you know, we were talking when there's university students involved, we not only now have authority through the UW system statutes to have disciplinary action with students involved in the kind of behavioral issues that were cited at the previous table on campus, we also have that authority off campus. And we've been working very closely with the police department and others on those issues in order to address those behaviors when they occur. So we think that that could then result in maybe some of the properties coming down in value, and then the not-for-profit could identify some of those properties as ones that could be rehabilitated and possibly converted to single-family again, because we know one of the primary concerns about historic Randall Park is they're down to 15% owner-occupied homes in that neighborhood. The other thing that we've talked about, and Daryl alluded to this earlier, is the possibility of our foundation becoming involved in purchasing of homes in adjoining neighborhoods and making those available to young faculty that are coming in and maybe getting their first jobs, and you know, having affordable quality housing near the campus as an incentive for them to take the job at Eau Claire versus being recruited at some other places, especially given that right now our salaries are well below what are being offered by universities in bordering states. So I think that we really need to take a look at having something in this plan that really speaks to the creation of moderate to higher density student housing, safe, affordable quality in close proximity to the university, with the goal of reducing the prices for those houses in the neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you. That was well stated. I appreciate those comments. All right, so that should be our comments. We're going to work over the next few weeks to incorporate those into this planning document. We'll make those changes. And then the next steps, we then go on to our Plan Commission. We'll go over what we just did tonight with the Plan Commission, plus the changes we talked about, and let them have a kick at the cat, as I call it. And that likely gets a few more changes into the document. And then it ends up at the council, with the council then getting, again, the same process in terms of review, comment, and possible changes. Yes, sir?
When do you imagine that will be going forward?
We will likely have an end of June, July time frame on that.
Okay.
And we will provide letters to all committee members as to when those meeting dates are. And we'd encourage you to come to the meetings and say, yeah, this was a great process and these are important things. And we encourage you to do that, particularly at the council level. The council is the final decision on it, and they love to hear from their citizens. So you'll get letters to inviting you to those meetings. Also, I will, based on comments from this group, be available to go out and provide presentations to other groups within the community or to other neighborhood groups. And we will actually next week send out the draft of this report with a memo saying, here's the draft report, please review. If you have any comments, get them back to me within a few weeks so that I can get those also to the Plan Commission in case any of the other neighborhood associations weren't at this meeting this evening. That, I think, is all I got to say, unless someone else here has anything else they need to add. All right.
I do.
Yes, Kathy?
I just would say that I thought that it was a very good report and that you should pass that on to Bill,
I will.
who for some reason isn't here tonight, but
Bill has reasons for not being here, so we did excuse him. And I said I'd take care of it this evening for him. So yes, Bill's been very good for this community for the past 25 years in all the planning work that we do. And if you ever need more help in the future, we always run and grab Bill. So yes, I'll pass that on to Bill.
I would second that. This is an excellent report.
Okay.
Really great work, everybody in the group.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for participating in the process, and you all have a wonderful evening.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cvctv.org.